Hi guys, so this is part 2 of pumping while when we go back to work, pumping at work while breastfeeding. My last point in part 1 was trying to make sure that we pump at the same time every day. And the reason for this is just that your body is going to make sure that you have milk ready when you pump at those times. But if you're constantly changing the time, you won't get enough milk out. So, for instance, if you find that you cannot make enough milk, you cannot pump enough milk in a day to provide for your baby full feeding, for a day, then you need to include some pumping at home. Now, of course, at home you want to be breastfeeding the baby, but you need to get in a feeding that is not scheduled, the baby is not eating. So you can do this an hour after the baby feeds. You can do this an hour before it's time to feed the baby. I would suggest about an hour after, and I would suggest either doing this in the morning or at night before you go to bed. So what I would say is pick an hour after you feed the baby, let's say it's 11 o'clock at night, and stick to that. Now at first you're not going to get much milk out, but as soon as you give it maybe 2-3 days, your body's going to realize, okay, we feed every day at 11 o'clock, so I need to have milk there, and you'll start your milk will start to increase. So if you find that you're struggling with milk production and having enough for the baby, you want to start including adding some pumpings at home. And like I said, just schedule them when you know typically that you're not going to miss it. For instance, bedtime. And if you decide to do it like, oh, I'm going to do 1 a.m. feeding because I know nothing will ever disturb that one, that's fine too. Just whatever works for you. But like I said, about 1 hour after the baby is what I would suggest. But moms do a bunch of different things. And like I said, at first, you won't get very much, but your body will begin to produce it. And even if the baby eats an hour later, the body will know and will adjust. So you don't have to worry about not having enough milk for the baby because you pumped. So that's an important thing to note, because I did not know that, and I ended up having to give formula once a day just because I could not pump enough. So I know there was another point I wanted to mention about that, but maybe I will think of it as we talk more. So I know I mentioned it on the last video and I didn't finish my thought, so I can't remember what it was. So she mentions that she pumped at 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. every day with a little variance. So she would set alarms on her calendar to remind her to go pump. She would do that on her computer. You can do that on your phone. He was taking 3 bottles at daycare. I was only able to pump twice at work. So I pumped in the morning at home after he ate, so my supply stayed large. That's an excellent tip. An excellent, way to make sure that you get enough milk to store for the baby. And it's always good, like, I know what the point I wanted to make, that you should start doing this 2 weeks prior to returning to work. I had mentioned that before. So you want to make sure that 2 weeks before before you go back to work, you want to make sure that the baby is still breastfeeding on you, but you want to start incorporating that extra feeding. I would do that just because when you're at work, you're a little more rushed. You don't tend to get as much out because you just feel a little bit like, oh, I should be working. Are they wondering where I am? So start to store milk 2 weeks before you go back to work. And also start to do a feeding on the bottle about 2 weeks before you go back to work as well, so that the baby can kind of get used to that. But don't skip a feeding. So if you give the baby a bottle give the baby a bottle, then you pump, because you don't want to miss that feeding. So that's the point that I wanted to make. That 2 weeks prior to going back to work, you want to introduce the bottle for 1 feeding, and you want to start pumping. It's always a good plan to have enough milk in your freezer that would last a week. 1 whole week is what they suggest. You can go more than that, but the reason for that is if you would get sick or something happens and you're separated from the baby, this would allow that little backup that you need. So by starting to pump 2 weeks prior, that also gives you time, and you have a little store in your freezer so that if you don't pump enough in the first few weeks or whatever, that you have that milk there. And so if you're not pumping very much and you're struggling those first couple weeks, you're okay because you have that store there. And then when your milk increases, or you just get, everything gets easier, then you can start. And I always recommend, if you ever, want to just add a pumping daily just for storing in the freezer, that's a good idea too. It's always good to have a backup. And I think a lot of women do when they breastfeed. Okay, the last point she mentions here is having an understanding, tolerant boss. Be sure to talk to them about your need to take a couple of breaks throughout the workday to pump. Her breaks lasted 20 minutes each, she mentioned. Most businesses have to offer unpaid breaks for breastfeeding mothers. Remind them that a breastfed baby is a healthy baby, and moms of healthy babies have to take less time off work. Excellent point. Again, because with your baby breastfeeding, there's less times you have to call in and say, I can't make it in, my baby's sick. So that's an important point to make. And she mentions here that they have to offer unpaid breaks for breastfeeding mothers. And yes, they do. But you don't have to be like overly stressed about, oh no, I'm gonna have to take all these breaks and not get paid for them. In a lot of jobs, when you're working full-time, you get, sometimes you get an hour lunch and 2 15-minute breaks. Some are two 15-minute breaks and 1/2 hour lunch. It just depends on where you work and exactly how things work. So what I used to do was I would take those 3 breaks that are paid, and I would divvy them up among 3 pumpings. So I would pump 3 times or 2 times, and I would just use my paid breaks. If you have to go over, then the most you might go over is 15 minutes. So, and that's just like 5 minutes each session is what I'm saying. So if you do 20, 20, 20, 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes for lunch, 20 minutes for your last pumping, then you're still under your 1 hour paid breaks and lunch. So that's my suggestion to add to that. Yes, by law, they have to provide a place for you to pump, and they have to provide time for you to pump, unpaid time. But like I mentioned, you should be able to use your paid breaks to cover those feedings and still be able to eat if you can kind of like spread them over. Instead of doing, 1/2 hour and 2 15, you just do it 20 minutes per break. So that's kind of my tip. Okay, so then this is just her last little point. She said, don't be alarmed if you're not pumping as much milk as your baby is taking away. Work in sessions at home if you can. Again, she said, right after the baby has eaten in the morning or right before you go to bed. That can help build up your supply and stock. And like I mentioned before, those are great times to breastfeed. Mornings, you tend to get the most milk. So pumping and feeding the baby in the morning is great. But like I mentioned before, you want to make sure that you feed your baby before you go to work, so that if you feed your baby like right before you go to work, then you don't have to pump for at least a good 3 hours, and that gives you some time. Also, be sure that your baby is used to getting breast milk from a bottle before you go back to work, and that's where my point comes in about 2 weeks prior. It's kind of funny because she is making all the points that are literally book suggested. These are actual facts that you'll get from a lactation consultant. So these are great. So again, you have to make sure that baby's taking a bottle. You start using that. And if you need help and tips, go online, check it out, or you can email me, comment, whatever. I can give you some tips on things that you can do to help the baby take the bottle. Sometimes they're horrible at it, though. They just refuse to. So she mentions they introduced a bottle around 3 or 4 weeks of age and gave him one once a week or so to make sure he was used to them before I returned to work. You could do that. You can introduce, I would say around 4 weeks. I wouldn't do it before 4 weeks because you're still getting good at breastfeeding, so I wouldn't introduce it before that unless you have to. And a lot of people actually do. So dads can feed too. So There's nothing wrong with that. And she said she did it once a week. So you can do that, or you can do the final 2 weeks once a day. That's up to you. Last thing, she says, persistent pays off when you're breastfeeding and working. It is a labor of love. Remember all the reasons you chose to breastfeed, and that will help you stay motivated. Good luck. So that was her point. If you would like this this information sent to you, leave me a email or leave me a comment, and I will be sure to email it to you. In fact, I think I will just go ahead and link this at the bottom of the page so that you can click on it and open up and be able to read it. Any other questions, please comment below, email me, and you know, I haven't really had a lot of people, I actually haven't had anybody make comments. I have seen some views, but I don't see many people commenting, so please leave a comment, and I definitely will answer any questions. And subscribe, and if you know anybody else who's breastfeeding, you know, mention my channel so that they can also ask questions and get the information that we'll talk about. So I'm not really sure what I'll talk about next, but it will be something definitely, and if you have any suggestions, let me know. Well, I hope that works for you guys. I hope that helps, and you guys have a great day. Guys, a quick point I wanted to add to the end of this is that the Medela and the Amida pumps are offered if you are a WIC client. If you have WIC, WIC does provide a free breast pump for exclusive breastfeeding moms. So if you're not getting any formula and you're an exclusive breastfeeding mom, they will provide you with a $300 pump. So that is something to consider. And if you're not on WIC, check into it, because it is the one government government program to help moms that has a higher pay scale. So if you make a little bit more, then you can still qualify. So a lot of moms will still qualify for WIC even though they make a little bit more money. So I want to recommend it. If you're not a WIC client, check into it. If you are, think about getting a pump from them if you are an exclusive breastfeeder. And if you're partial, think about going exclusive so that you can benefit from that free pump. So that's just a point I wanted to add real quick to the end of this video. So any questions, again, feel free to comment below, because I can let you know, and I can even put you in contact with your local WIC breastfeeding peer counselor to provide you the pump. So please comment below if you have any questions concerning that, and I will definitely get back to you. So I hope that helps, guys, and I just want to make sure to give you that information. All right, guys, have a great day.